Um, I just want to welcome everybody to this third session of the Global Leadership Pathway in the President's Student Leadership Institute, PSLI. And today we're so honored to have Dr. Jody Olson presenting. She's a familiar friend of UMB, and we're so happy to have you, Jody. Just to let everyone know that Dr. Jody Olson served as the 20th Director of the Peace Corps from 2018 to 2021. And that was just the pinnacle of her time at Peace Corps. She was originally a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia from 1966 to 1968. And then she served in other capacities, including acting director, deputy director, chief of staff, regional director for North Africa, Near East, Asia, and Pacific, and also country director in Togo. So if there's anyone that knows Peace Corps, it's Jody. And prior to that, of course, she was a visiting professor at our School of Social Work, and she started the Center for Global Engagement, which is hosting this PSLI series. So we're just so thrilled to have her back giving this lecture, and she's agreed to be a senior fellow in the Center for Global Engagement, which is thrilling for all of us. So on that note, Jody, welcome. And I will now turn it over to you and to Lauren to start sharing your slides.
Thank you all. And thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Lauren. And just for all of you to know, Virginia also is a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the Marshall Islands, one of those countries that might not be with us a lot longer. But she was a different generation than me, but it's that opportunity, I think, for all of us to know what the influence Peace Corps has on our lives. I see that Heidi has also joined us. Heidi also is a returned Peace Corps volunteer. Was it Thailand? Thailand. Even another generation. So, and there might be others here that were volunteers. So why don't we begin with the slides? And what I'll do is any of you who would like to share your screen, please go ahead and do so. And I will talk for a little bit. And then I want to open it up for questions because I really would like this to be a discussion about what are emergencies, emergency preparedness, and emergency leadership. So I would like to talk just briefly about Peace Corps. And from there, I will then talk about the COVID pandemic and its impact on Peace Corps. Then third, I'll talk about the critical elements that made the evacuation successful. And then with that, I'll open it up to questions. First, Peace Corps. As Virginia noted, Peace Corps goes way back, even back far enough to me. But it was begun in 1961 by President Kennedy, and it was his brother-in-law, Sarge Shriver, who actually put Peace Corps in place. And so over these 60 years, over 250,000 Americans have served in 142 different countries for upwards of 2 years each, most often 2 years each. And critically for that success in why Peace Corps is so important, next slide, Lauren, why Peace Corps is so important, as you see, is who are these volunteers and who are those that they are working with? Peace Corps is about an American going into a community, feeling vulnerable, learning a language, learning cultural ways, learning about food that had never been eaten before by that volunteer, learning behaviors that might seem strange. And in that process, the Peace Corps volunteers have to give themselves away. They have to say, I'm vulnerable. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I know I'm here to teach English, or I'm here to help with gardening, or I'm here to work with HIV/AIDS prevention or malaria prevention. There are numerous projects that they know that they're there to do, but in a context that is so different that they feel vulnerable in getting started and becoming part of that community. And what's important about Peace Corps is that they have to say to their counterparts, and you see some of them with counterparts in the photos, but they have to say to their counterparts, trust me, and I'm trusting you, because you're going to help teach me how I do this work I'm supposed to do. And what happens is that between the volunteer and the family and the community is this mutual sense of trust and respect that enables both the volunteer to learn, the counterpart to learn, the community to learn, the kids to learn. Let me give a quick example. In Senegal, when I was there on one of my most recent trips, which was almost 3 years ago now, there was a wonderful Japanese American who, first generation American, who was working with a farming community in rural Senegal. She had been there about a year. She was from San Francisco. And I watched her and the farmer together in what they were doing. One, she spoke the local language. She lived with a host family. She had spent time with the kids in the community. She had spent almost every day with the farmer and his family. How do you do this? What works here? What doesn't work here? All of this, as she was learning the nonverbal and the verbal vocabulary of farming in rural Senegal. They slowly moved to a place. She, by the way, had a degree in agriculture. So they moved to a place where they shared ideas for change. What if we do natural fertilizer on the spinach? What difference does it make? Let's do different rows so we can show that and bring the kids in from the classrooms down the street so they too can see what is a role for natural fertilizer for raising spinach. She and the farmer worked together in new ways to plant trees. And then they showed me how to plant a tree. I don't know whether it survived, but it's very complicated. And then the kids came in so that the kids could also practice planting the trees. She also worked with the kids' mothers and the wives of the community and with the farmer's wife on how do you then preserve, particularly the mangoes that are being grown on this farm. And together they set up a little co-op so that the women were seeing how to not raise the crops, but how to preserve the crops for the dry season. This all happened because she let herself go and said, I need you. I'm here to be helpful. I'm here to share new ideas, but only through you can I do it, because you're going to teach me as much as I teach you. She and the farmer had become absolute best friends, and watching almost like a father-daughter between these two people as they were sharing farming techniques that they were discovering together. That's what was so exciting. That's a small example of what upwards of 250,000 Peace Corps volunteers have done over these 60 years. Now, next slide. As we all know, almost 2 years ago, it was March 2020, when COVID in effect took over the world. And I was director. We had 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers in 61 countries in all continents, not the two poles and not Australia, but all the main continents of the world, we had Peace Corps volunteers, 7,000. Not only were they in the 61 countries, but they were in the villages in the communities in these countries. They were 40 hours on a train or 20 hours on a bicycle away from the capital city. They were doing things like that volunteer was doing in Senegal. And we were watching in Peace Corps what was beginning to happen about how the countries were worried about closing their borders, about how they were one by one not letting the international flights come and go. We were hearing this from the inside. We were hearing this from the communities. We were hearing this from the Minister of Health. We weren't hearing it from CDC. We were not hearing it from WHO. And we weren't hearing it from the embassies. We were hearing it from the communities, from the volunteers, from the counterparts, from those in country who were watching what was happening as their countries were closing down. This was over a couple of days or a few days or a week, not longer. And we realized it came from the community to the Peace Corps country director in the country, the host country staff that were there, to the regional directors in Washington, then to me, saying, we have a crisis. This is spreading. The countries are scared. They're closing down. We have to do something dramatic. It was March 15th, 2:00 in the afternoon on a bright Sunday afternoon. You can tell I never forgot that moment. When I got the call from my associate director, who said the regional directors are now recommending that we have to pull all 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers from around the world, from 61 countries, from hundreds of communities around the world now. That was probably the worst moment of my life. Well, I've had a few, but in terms of Peace Corps and my commitment to 60 years of Peace Corps, that has driven me forward since the age of 22. I was just so sad to have to make this decision to pull everybody out. I went through those moments of, am I a failure? Are we a failure? Is this going to be a failure for Peace Corps? Will we be able to do it? Will we be able to do it successfully? But there wasn't time to think about it. Well, 5 minutes worth, because the movement was moving so fast. We knew we were within hours, for example, of Ukraine, which was our biggest country, closing all the borders. We knew that the planes in Thailand were being closed out. We had to move. So by 10 o'clock that night, I had had a senior staff meeting by phone because I had ordered everybody home 3 days before. So we could not use the offices, but we hadn't practiced or knew how to do things by phone or by computer or by Zoom. No. That was the first, that evening of March 15th was the first Zoom. No, we didn't have Zoom then. We got Zoom 2 days later. Was the first conference call we had ever, knowing how to make this fundamental decision by conference call. I said, I want the email out to everyone around the world by 10:30 tonight. In part because I knew that it would be Monday for most of the countries, and we did not have much time. And I did not ask the White House. I did not ask the Department of State. I did not ask Congress. I did it. We did it. The agency did it. Why did I not ask? It would drag it out. We are an independent agency. And if we dragged it out even 24 hours, we would not be able to get volunteers out. So I put it out to the world. Then Monday morning, called state, called the White House, called the Hill, just to let them know we're on our way. They were shocked because they didn't have the kind of information that we had, because they were not on the ground. They weren't watching, and they didn't have the kind of partnership that we had, where the leaders in the country were telling us, you've got to move quickly. Now, 4 and 5 days later, I had a couple of ambassadors call me going, how did you know? And then, can we get ourselves on your airplanes? Because we had to charter several to get many of our volunteers out. I said, I'll have to talk to the Peace Corps country directors. That it took almost 4 months for Fulbrighters to come home. We got 7,000 volunteers home in 9 days. 9 days. We did not lose anybody. Nobody got injured. Nobody got sick. Why? How? The communities offered the bicycles. They offered taxis. They gave volunteers free nighttime space as the volunteers moved to the capital cities. They housed people. They gave little mini goodbyes that were done in hours before the volunteers left. All critical for volunteers to safely make it. How did that happen? Why did it happen? It was because of the 60 years of trust that had been established in these partnerships. Next slide. So what we see, as I put, just the summary together, is how could we get 7,000 people back to the US and quarantine them for 14 days before they went home? How did that happen? One, as a leader making a decision, I didn't know that that would happen. I wasn't sure that would happen. I just knew we had no choice. We had to move quickly. And I hoped that all over the globe, people knew what they needed to do in each little spot and corner of that world. And why could I trust it? One, as you see, sustainable partnerships. We had been there for the countries. We had country agreements. We had community agreements. We did our best to honor that when a volunteer came in, that volunteer would do what that community wanted that volunteer to do. We knew that foreign ministries, health ministries, we were honoring what they asked. They could then come back and honor us when we needed to leave. As you also see by the photos, volunteer integration, and I talked about mutual trust and vulnerability. We built the strength of how you come together across languages and cultures to be present for each other. We had been helpful, we had been learning, we had been sharing. They, our counterparts, our host families, our schools, our clinics came through for us during that emergency. Preparedness. Emergencies don't just happen. Well, emergencies just happen, and that one just happened. But being ready for emergency doesn't just happen. For years, in fact, most of Peace Corps' life, we had practiced safety and security. We had practiced emergency procedures for moving from one town to another. We had code words on cell phones. All Peace Corps volunteers had to have charged cell phones ready to go at all times. They knew what to do when they got the note that they needed to leave. Host country national staff were prepared. They knew where every volunteer was. They knew how to go get them, to find them, to work with them, to bring them back. We knew how to keep them healthy in this journey. This had been practiced, never thinking we would really have to use it, for decades. And it got much better when we all got our cell phones about 20 years ago. That was key. We thought we were going to use it for, if there's a coup, and we had used it on a country by country basis. We didn't know that preparedness was global and based on years of practice. I want to emphasize communication. I had to say everything to everybody. I couldn't hide anything. The trickiness of finding planes, begging charters to come to Ukraine, begging charters to Ethiopian Airways changed its flight schedules just for us. I had to share everything. Host country national staff, the Peace Corps staff, the US staff, the volunteers themselves, the ministers of health, the ministers of education, the ambassadors. We were all in it together. We knew what the goal was. Nobody hid anything. It is transparency in a crisis that makes it work. And finally, 60 years of friendship offered that full support. It offered the support, for example, again, Ukraine, when the ticket people, so here were 250 volunteers who finally made it to the airport. It was a long slog to get there. And all the ticketing stuff didn't work, none of it. Several local Ukrainians jumped in and by hand wrote out all the ticketing, all the stuff that had to be completed one by one by hand, because they said, we want to be here for you. Cross nations. When I talked to leaders in countries, I said, you've been here for us. We want to be here for you as soon as we can go back. How did we demonstrate that? We had and still have all in-country staff, all host national staff still are fully employed. This is one direct way of saying to the countries, this partnership did not end with COVID. This partnership did not end with us leaving. We're going back. The staff, the host country, all that you have helped set up with us, we're going to stay strong with you. Our host country staff, since the evacuation, have been doing curriculum development. They've also been working in agricultural curriculum development. They have been working with the communities. They can't do what a volunteer does. Legally, they can't. But they have been present in all those very indigenous ways to say, we're holding on for the volunteers to come back. That's what sustained full support means. Each side has to honor its commitment. And I am grateful, I have to say, I'm very grateful to Congress because they kept our budget so we could sustain our staff overseas. We could bring in resources for curriculum development and other activity, even without Peace Corps volunteers. So where are we today? Final slide. Where are we today? No volunteers yet in country. The first ones are due back in the Dominican Republic and Zambia just after the new year. Things are now building up to go back. I saw and listened and talked to national leaders up through my time at Peace Corps, which was last January. And they all said, we are ready to welcome you back. Because you're here, you've been here, you've never let us down. And I could say back to them, and you never let us down. We all say, as returning Peace Corps volunteers, we learned more than we gave. And our counterparts say, and we've learned so much from you. And I just wanted to, this quote coming from a volunteer as she left, but I forgot how much it hurts to leave your friends. But that grassroots relationship is where peace is, but it's hard to leave because everybody became friends. Lauren, you can now open it up. It shows that emergencies and successful management of emergencies take preparation and building sustainable partnership relationships over time. You always have to treat the other fairly. You always have to be honest with the other, whomever that might be. You have to give yourself away. Host families give away to volunteers. Volunteers give themselves away to host families. All of them, healthcare professionals. It is that mutual giving. That's how we can be there for each other in emergency. We prepare. Second, just to say one other point, when you have to make a decision, you have to make that decision. Be ready to make decisions. Stay in touch with staff, stay in touch with colleagues all the way through. Because at that moment, you don't have time to negotiate. You don't have time to go, should it be this? Should it be this? You have to be ready. And the readiness is how you learn, how you work in teams, how you understand, how you listen. The 2 months leading up to March 15th was 2 months of listening to what was happening country by country as the COVID began to spread, so that we could be ready. I could be ready because I knew I was at that moment fundamentally changing the history of Peace Corps. It was not what I wanted to do. It was not the kind of change I wanted to have happen. But I knew. You will know. You will know if you're prepared. That is what is so important. Trust, care, be a good partner. People will trust you back when you have to make difficult decisions. I'll stop there. I wanted to give plenty of time for questions and comments. So let me turn it over to all of you. And I just see one question.
There's one question in the chat. Yeah, from Michelle. Maybe you can just speak the question if you want, Michelle.
Yeah,
Thank
do you want
you,
to speak it
Jody.
up? Hi, Michelle, go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry, my background is a little loud, but can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'll hear you just fine.
First and foremost, I'm in awe. I don't know how you did that. This is extremely just amazing and awe-inspiring, as my chat note just said. So great job. I'm curious about your learning curve in retrospect. In the event that this ever happens again, what did you learn from the first time around that you would do again? Obviously, the strong points that you just went through, but what are some of the other things that you might implement or change, either in your direction or either in your communication?
Thank you. It's a really good question. I think the changes, I'm still pondering all of that. Probably we, the learning that we got from it is how to work better across countries. We had never had to work across countries before. I mean, for example, with Ethiopian Airways needing to, well, raising its hand and said, you've been good to us for 60 years. We will now change our flight. We were collectively on the continent in touch. These are 10, 12 different countries in touch with each other in a way that they've never had to coordinate before. And so we were doing it on the fly, but I think preparation in the future is looking at better transparency and communication skills across countries, host country nationals to host country nationals. It would have made it a little bit more efficient and a little bit easier for everyone. That I might note that following the actual evacuation and even during it, as Zoom calls started getting up and practiced, we could bring host country national staff together across countries in ways that we hadn't been able to do it before. And they bonded and they learned to solve a lot of the problems much closer to the ground. So another learning is how to give permission, how to give away enough of the decision-making that it can be done quickly on the ground.
Do you think
Gives the main point that you've got to give it away for it to be successful.
Do you think that the urgency of the situation actually worked in your benefit versus actually having time for people to ponder and to interact with other individuals or other leaders that might delay the situation?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I hadn't quite thought about it the way you asked it until just now. Absolutely, that we realized, and part of the communicating across countries was Ukraine has 24 hours, Thailand has 36 hours. Peru, as you know from the headlines, kind of got stuck, but we went to the head of the line and we got out in 4 days. We shared all of that. And so they knew, don't quibble, don't ponder. You've practiced, just do it. But to just do it, you had to trust that doing it would work. So all the drills that you all go through in your training, and I shouldn't call them drills because it's all the training and working in emergency situations, you know, on the floor and wherever you're working, those are key because you have to let the emotional memory, muscle memory kick in to say we can trust our brains, we can trust our training, and we can trust each other. And then you don't hesitate because you are right, Michelle. Any hesitation, it would have been disastrous. We would have lost volunteers. We could see it coming.
Any other questions? You can just dive in or, oh, Michelle, you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
What is the status of the Peace Corps now? You may have said it, I might have missed it, but how many troops do you have out there, and what are your future plans for re-implementing into these different countries?
Okay, good question. We do not have anyone back. We expect the first volunteers back right in the first of the year to the Dominican Republic and Zambia. And then we see 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 countries coming up right after that. What's interesting, and for all of you who are in medical and medical emergencies, will get what is a critical issue for Peace Corps going back. One, of course, is all the COVID questions. and all the volunteers will be fully vaccinated, and the staff are all fully vaccinated. Host country national staff are fully vaccinated, and we have done months of health preparation for COVID. Second, in terms of the volunteers going back, it's about what does the country need in this new environment? Is it more agriculture? Is it more education? Is it health communication? Is it public health? And for almost everyone, it's additional training in public health education, regardless of what the primary assignment of the volunteer might be. Because we know about all the fear levels in the US, multiply it to villages all over the world who have little sense in many of these situations what's involved for staying healthy against COVID. So it's a whole other set of dynamic. And finally, we have to be ready to evacuate volunteers that have medical emergencies for whatever reason. And that has been the biggest problem because our medical hub countries, Morocco, Pretoria, and Bangkok, all got leveled, so to speak, by the COVID. And so we could be good in Rwanda because they managed the COVID very well, but we couldn't get a volunteer to Pretoria if he or she had appendicitis. And so we've had to build new and different medical emergency systems in order for the volunteers to go back. So we're going to go back different and stronger.
Wonderful. One of the things that I notice here in the general community, number one would be the mental health of all of the stress situations that has, just these tiny little pieces of stress that people don't even realize that they're under. So the mental health issue is a huge concern everywhere around the world. And more importantly, the grief counseling. And is that something that that the volunteers or the community advocates are trained in? Is that part of the program? I apologize for my ignorance. I'm not that familiar with.
No, good question. Yeah, fine. And you can go on mute when you're not actually asking the question. Thank you. We have a whole mental health unit. And the mental health unit that sits side by side, the physical health unit, is there for backup for Peace Corps volunteers themselves. Now, this means that as volunteers are preparing to go back, we have added training, mental health training, as well as COVID training, and trauma training, and grief training, for what volunteers are going to have happen to them, because we have to recognize that mostly young people have been through so much these last 2 years in the United States. They're going to have things happen to them that they don't anticipate before they get there. We have to be ready to process whatever trauma, whatever feeling they're having, and with our host country medical staff trained to support that. Second, through host country training with our host country staff and the physical and mental health host country staff, volunteers will learn how do you work in communities that are going through trauma, that are grieving, that are acting out in ways that we hadn't seen before. That's a whole different and additional piece that is also needing to be added to the training. And that's what's being put in place right now. And part of it, and a hard part, is recognizing that we're not the same as we go back. They're not the same as we go back. And we have to rediscover each other, hear each other, understand each other, feel for each other, or it's not going to work. And so it's hard to even anticipate some of what's going to happen. But as your mental health question, yay for mental health coming out of social work, that's what we're preparing, but we're also needing to stay attuned, to watch and to listen, that we can turn on a dime again if we need to. And that's part of why it's really hard to go back. And I think, as you all find, in really going back into countries, people who are coming here from other countries, we're all sort of tiptoeing through because we don't quite know. It's exciting and it's scary.
Great, great. Thank you so much. And this really fits in with the theme of leadership, which is the name of this pathway, global leadership. So thank you for all that. Does anyone else have a question? Heidi, do you? Go ahead.
Hi, Jody. I just had a quick question. You know, it's amazing that Peace Corps was able to keep all of their employees, you know, paid through this whole closure, and that you have offices that are ready to accept volunteers back. But I was wondering, sort of, you know, other organizations, people who are just starting, how do you, you know, make that a more robust like situation? You know, how do you reinforce, you know, that commitment to international partners? And is that something you plan for in advance? You know, is that, you know, do you have a backup plan for people who are employed overseas?
No, it's a good question. We were lucky, and I know a lot of the NGOs aren't that lucky. They don't have the resources to do it. One element that we discovered that I think is really important for other communities or other organizations that are building the blocks to return to these cross-national opportunities is what the gift of Zoom. I don't want to advertise Zoom. I'll just use it as a placeholder for all these things we do. That we, for example, made sure we stayed in touch. And we built a new program where Peace Corps volunteers did 10-week virtual assignments in their communities. And that way we could stay close to the counterparts. We could stay close to the kids. We stayed close to the farmers. We stayed close to the health clinics in these short-term virtual partnerships. We also really worked to reach out to all that we volunteered with overseas. So for organizations that could not hold on to staff, I think you work through WhatsApp, you work through Zoom, you work through whatever all these vehicles we have to reinforce that you're there. You reinforce that you care, reinforce that you're understanding, reinforce you appreciate what everybody is going through, and that at that moment that you can physically get together, we're here to listen, we're here to see, we're here to have you talk to us. All that can be started now. It's not the best solution because so many countries are really struggling now with employees that don't have jobs anymore, and resources that are not there, and systems that have changed. And how do you build systems under new systems? But it is the conversations, and the conversations themselves, which cost almost nothing, are saying, we are here for the long haul. We are here for the partnership. We're listening. What is the need? What can we do? How can we be there for each other? And coming back to Michelle's trauma question and mental health question, let's just listen to each other. We had what we called coffee chats with host country national staff and our own staff in Washington, because they were all at home too. And we would have 700, 800 people on what we called a coffee chat. We even had a picture of a little coffee with a little heart all in it. And we would break into 100 little chat rooms. It was quite a massive undertaking, but it was only to say in Nepal, how are you doing? What's happening? What are you doing for your kids? South Africa, Timor-Leste, Peru. That was key to holding us together. And I think even if we can't pay each other, or if the payment overseas can't be there temporarily, setting up and trying and having those, let's just listen to each other, goes a long way to speed up the return.
Thanks, Jody.
You know, if no one else has a question, Jody, I'd like to ask, with 7,020 somethings, I know that there are some over 30. I can't believe that you didn't run into a few that said, nope, I'm staying. Did that happen? And oh, 5. And then, okay, 7. And so how did you, what's an example of that? And how did you deal with that? Which seems like very difficult situation.
7, those who, it was 7 in the end. And we ended their Peace Corps service. It was the only thing we could do. And we wished them well. We gave them the amount of readjustment allowance they were supposed to get. We gave them the benefits that you get when you come home. And within 24 hours, we said goodbye. We had no other choice. Only 7 out of those 7,000 plus stayed.
So you assume they ended up staying, but also you didn't care because they were not part of Peace Corps anymore.
Right, we cared, but we only cared indirectly.
Yeah, wow. So that's very interesting. 7.
No, we had to do it that way, and we went through all our legal things, because also, and this was one of the elements that was really hard for the returning Peace Corps volunteers, in case you want to wonder what happened to all those wonderful Americans that came back to the US with anywhere from 12 hours to 7 days notice that they were going to be back in the US with no plans. That we had to end their Peace Corps service when they arrived in the United States. They're volunteers. And so they're not employees. And so we don't have any legal mechanism for them to stay on our rolls for any purpose. That was something, again, Peace Corps had never anticipated, having 7,000 people come home to nothing. So we worked with Congress and was able to, 1, give them 3 extra months of health insurance. We were able to stay with those that had medical issues for the full 45 days, and then over to the Department of Labor if they still needed help. We performed what was a minor miracle, if not a major miracle, was for COVID purposes, and this group only, through a bill in Congress, we got them unemployment because they were legally ineligible. Because they had not been employees. And so Congress wrote a little line in there that because of the circumstance, these particular volunteers could get unemployment. We offered counseling to those who needed counseling, job service support. One other element, every returning volunteer, again, because we got Congress to change things within days. Again, this is what partnership is about, that any returning volunteer would be eligible for non-competitive eligibility in the federal government. Normally, you're eligible if you've been a volunteer for at least a year. We made everyone eligible so that they could step to the head of the line to get a job within the federal government. And that, again, was because over the years, we had pipelines for this to happen on a onesies and twosies basis. Now we had it happen on a great big huge basis. So we're trying to be there for the returning volunteers. Many universities, we have what we call the Coverdell Fellows Program at 120 graduate schools around the country. Many of these programs stepped up and said, we will offer more scholarships. We will offer more places for these returning Peace Corps volunteers to get on with graduate school. Again, those returning volunteers are respected. They've been respected for years. And those partners said, we want to be here for them. They gave service to this country. They gave service to countries where they served. This is the least of what we can do. Okay. Of the 7,000, how many do I think are going to return? We don't have a long-term answer. I was talking to the desk officer for the Dominican Republic, and I said, what's it looking like for the DR in January? And about a third are going back. I think overall it will be less than that because lives move on. People get graduate school, people get married, they get jobs, they do things in life. But we might get, as I say, that number is a big number, partly because it's the first country and everybody's going, yes, 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 we want to go back. But, maybe 10, 20% in the end will go back. So there's opportunities for a lot of new people to go this coming year. I had to put in my advertisement, put in my plug.
Well, we're coming near the end. Do we have any more questions out there? Did you see that question in the chat, Jody?
Yeah, for those who stayed, the 7 who stayed, in I think about 3 situations, they had married a host country national, and a couple engaged. They had moved into being present in the country a lot longer, and normally they would have completed their 2 years and potentially with their partners, for those who got married, would come back to the US. But since it happened like this, for whatever their reasons were, and usually romantic, they felt that they needed to stay, or they wanted to stay, at least for the time being. But it was 100% their decision. We wanted them to come home, but they're volunteers. You don't force anybody to do anything when you're a volunteer. Any last words, comments, questions? You're all going to be great leaders. Don't be hesitant. Trust yourself. Trust yourselves. If there's any piece of advice, practice and trust yourself. You'll do it well.
Well, I can really thank you so much, Jody, for being part of this session today. It's so great. Of course, it would have been nicer to be in person, but we're working through this, and just like you had to work through your situation. And so great to have everyone here joining us today. And so on that note, again, thank you. See you all for the next session. And Dr. Olson is now part of the Center for Global Engagement that she started as a senior fellow. So anyone who's interested in Peace Corps in any way can reach out to the center, and we can put you in touch with Jody. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.